call for the Chattahoochee Hills Convention District Bureau. Roll call so that you know who is here. When you want to start.
Joyce Wood,
Janice Barton,
Clarice Strong,
Kara Lucas Edwards,
Mike Grotto.
Brooke LaCour,
Carter Williamson.
Steve Langren. So the record show that 8 of the 9 board members are present. As this has personal relationships, the agenda, I will turn the gavel over to Mike Grotto.
Great, thanks, Steve. So obviously, I think there's been a lot since this HMT tax came up. There's been a lot of questions from the board, just really want to understand the clarity of the legal documentation that was given to us July 8th, I believe. So I think what's best for all of us is maybe just round tabling. I think all of us came back with additional questions that we had. And Steve, thank you for responding to all the questions initially that we had. I think there's still continued questions from the board. And what I'd like to do is round table from the board, each one of their questions, and be able to have Rick follow up and make some legal direction to us to make sure that we are all understanding what this vote means as it relates to funding, as it relates to the development, and that we all feel comfortable with our vote. So why don't I start with Clarice, and we'll just kind of go clockwise. Sorry, not Clarice, Kara. Kara,
Okay.
Clarice. So this is going to be kind of an informal workshop. We're just here to learn and understand and get our footings on the legal terminology of the IGA that Steve's team put together. So let's take why don't we start with questions and then take notes and see how it goes.
that sounds good. I guess since I'm starting it off, do you want to just start off with some fundamental questions? I think in my mind, just to clarify, let's just start off with a softball. The definition of incremental HMT tax. I think that was confused in a little way. Some people are wondering if it's the full 8%. Is it the name kind of alludes that it's the increment of what it was versus what it is now? Or are we referring to the full 8% every time we use incremental tax?
As it's defined in the agreement, the incremental hotel motel tax, and I'll call it HMT, so
Okay.
I'm not stumbling.
Okay,
Is the hotel motel tax that the 2 hotels that are part of this project would be paying
Okay.
or collecting from their guests.
okay. So that varies then depending on how we move forward.
Right.
Okay, so the potential tax gain.
Right.
Okay.
It's not the current tax from the other
Okay,
hotels and the Airbnbs that pay the HMT.
okay.
and it has nothing to do with the differential from the 5 to 8 or any of
Correct.
that.
It would be the total 8 for those 2 hotels. It's
Thank
included in here. Now, 1% of it, if you remember, will be dedicated or transferred to the CVB. Okay.
And just a follow up to that, and we are talking about distributing this tax money to those 2 hotels only, or is the wellness, the aging in place of the wellness center involved in that at all? Okay. Okay, so that would make sense. Just those 2 hotels. Okay. Just so everybody knows what we're talking about.
And since the second hotel, Six Senses, that's coming in, and that's owned and operated by IHG, are they familiar with the HMT? What's happening here right now? Are they already?
Is the hotel chain familiar?
The
I
hotel chain.
don't know. It was being set up. I'm assuming
Yeah, do
they're
they know?
not.
I can clarify that. So they're not gonna own and operate the hotel, so it will be a different ownership group, but and we're still using Wellness Hub instead of a brand name before we break ground. But they will be the management company, not the owner of the hotel.
Got it. Thank you for that clarity.
Do you want to recognize that Julianne has arrived?
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't even, where did she
She
just
just-
appear from a back door?
She snuck in, she crawled.
All right, Julianne, would you like to communicate that you are here as part of the board?
My name's Julianne West, and
I documented her time too, so.
Julianne West is present.
So you don't talk with. In case it's, that way too online.
I think it is.
So can we also go back to kind of a fundamental question as well that I think we all had as a board is the CVB is not allowed to set up a 501c6 as a private entity. We have to have this 8% being funded through a DMO.
No, not the total 8%. The CVB is a public body. It's created by the Georgia legislature. There are some private CVBs located throughout the state. The Atlanta CVB is one of them. There's one in Alpharetta. I know that's also a 501c6. This group can never become a 501c6. So for the direct marketing organization, referred to quite often as the DMO, will have to be a newly created nonprofit organization, probably a corporation, but some type of organization that will apply to the IRS for 501c6 treatment. And they'll
But
only
does that
get,
have to happen in order for the money to funnel through to support the development?
that'll have to happen for the 8% to be hotel motel tax to be implemented. So that's going to have to happen before the city can start collecting the 8%, because we have to give 1.5, well, it really could be a little more than 1.5%, but let's just call it 1.5% of the hotel motel tax to that DMO.
So are we set up correctly? Should we be?
It's not you. It's not you.
Okay.
It could be, if this group wanted to reform or whatnot, but I don't think that's, in fact, I think that would be the inappropriate way to go based on the structure of this, because and I'm going to start getting into the weeds here, but there has to be an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement. There are so many initials here, and I hate it's going to like alphabet soup, but an intergovernmental agreement, an IGA between the city and this group here, okay, the CVB. That is one of the only type of contracts that the city can enter into that lasts more than a year. An intergovernmental agreement under the Constitution of the state of Georgia can last up to 50 years as long as it's for a governmental purpose. And so what's being presented here, of course, that's going to take the city council to vote on as well, is to enter into an IGA for up to 30 years. It's actually going to be active for 15 years, but in that 30-year kind of range, there'll be this agreement in place dealing with the hotel motel tax. If the CVB were a 501c6 entity, a private entity, the city council could only enter into 1-year contracts with that. So it really would give no comfort to the applicant here, to the developer. So it's really better the way that's established right now. If this group wants to do it, and if the city council wants to do it, to enter in the IGA, it then gives the city council the authority, the legal authority to enter the contract of that length, and then everything's in place to be able to fund these hotels, these projects.
And then if we were entering into the IGA, does that automatically accept the developer agreement?
No,
I know that can be negotiated.
They're two different agreements. You, as a CVB, believe it or not, have the ability to enter into multi-year contracts. A city does not have the ability to do that. A county does not have the ability to do that. But development authorities, CVBs, airport authorities can enter into multi-year contracts. I mean, go figure. But that's the Constitution of Georgia. Okay, so you can enter into a multi-use development agreement with the developer if you agree to the terms, and then you, for whatever length of time that is, and then you can enter into the IGA along with the city for that period of time, again, up to 50 years.
Did you want to bring up the tax piece?
Well, I just had another question. So can we appoint or hire an existing DMO, or do you have to form a DMO?
No, it'd be really any 501c6
That is set up
organization
to provide
that's
those services.
right, that's properly set up to, it has the authority to do what we need for them to do. So yeah, we could go, we wanted to, I don't know, let's say there's one in College Park or
Exactly.
something, we could do
can
that.
Find one. We don't have to form one.
Correct.
And who, does the city hire the DMO or does the CVB? The city hires. Great. I had a question about somehow, we've had so many documents. I can't keep up, but
These are difficult documents.
they're extremely difficult.
We're going to have a test on them on Friday. So
Especially for those of us that didn't pass the bar.
Exactly.
So Title 48, Revenue and Taxation, Chapter 8, Sales and Use Taxes. Does that pertain to anything we're,
No,
thank you.
so you can put that away.
I'm with that one. Another thing that I think I wasn't clear on. Does the move from 7% to 8%?
Can you hang on just a second? Sorry, I just have to let her know the council members can be here and listen. They just can't participate because it's subject to the open meetings law. That's why I needed to stop and just make sure that she was aware of that. So sorry.
That's all right. The move from 7% to 8% on the HMT tax. Does 8% require this document that we're doing, the ICA agreement and tourism product development?
No. It doesn't require these documents or similar documents. What the 8% HMT requires is this. So the first 5%, the first 5 pennies on the dollar of the hotel motel tax are to be spent as if the city only had a 5% HMT. So
Right.
the first 3 pennies can be used in the general fund used by the city any way that it wants to use it. The next 2 pennies, when we go to the 8%, have to be directed to either a CVB or the state or a state agency, something like that, to be used to promote tourism and
Right.
conventions and trade shows.
And as a authority, we can receive that 2%
Correct.
for TPT or
Uh,
TCT.
trade,
Trade,
just say
convention,
tourism,
yes.
just make it simple. Tourism, okay?
Right. Yep.
Then you go to the next 3%, that kind of icing on the cake, okay? At least 1.5 pennies of the 3 cents that would get us up to 8 has to go to the direct marketing organization. That's at 501c6, okay?
Right.
To again be used for promoting tourism, et cetera.
Right.
The remaining portion, it can be up to 1.5%, can't be more than 1.5%, can go to a product, to something on the ground, like a convention center or something that qualifies.
Can or must?
Must, okay? And there's a list in the definition section of the
Yeah.
hotel motel tax that lists from letters A through P. So what's that? 16 different types of items,
Right.
like lodging,
Right.
a hotel, also arts facilities. I know they've got that in there, the educational part with the green rooftop, roof to table part they're talking about. So that 1.5 pennies can be spent on
But must be spent on product, not tourism.
correct.
And that product has to have a public element,
Correct.
meaning open to the public besides paying the rent.
I not necessarily. Okay, it doesn't have to be free to the public, it has to be available
Available,
to the
yeah.
public. Okay, and while we're talking about all this, and I had to talk to Dan or email Dan, who's I think on Zoom this morning to kind of clarify the first 3 pennies, the money that the city has the right to kind of spend legally any way it wants to make sure that's not a gratuity going to a private entity. And there's going to be an ownership component from what I've read in the documents from the Fulton County Development Authority, so that the city can direct through the CVB monies that are, again, have a publicly owned component to it and the public use. So we'll have to watch it. We'll have to be very careful to stay inside the lane, but there are lots of examples of such facilities that have been built like this. You can look at the Atlanta Braves Stadium right now, Truist Field or Truist Park. use the HMT money, the Georgia, I always get it wrong, but the GCCC that's outside the airport or whatever also uses the hotel motel tax money. So there are examples of that. And Steve has hired some very smart attorneys and they have kept it in the lane, but we'll have to, as we go through this 15 years, this body and the city will have to look at it in the audits, whatever else we have, to make sure the monies are being properly and appropriately allocated.
When you say we,
Right.
who is we?
CVB and the city
So the
council.
CVB, us as a board, is managing the financials,
Well,
the check-ins and the audits?
right, under the agreement, your development agreement, the developer has to provide you with audited information so that we can see where the money went and that it was properly used.
So do we have the ability to bring on an accountant and legal
Are we
team to
using
be able to
city
help?
services?
could, you
What services
could.
are we using for that?
Well, you could, well, you guys are gonna have a 1 cent of the hotel motel tax. You could hire your own accountant, spend the money that way if you wanted to, right? But again, if we get audited reports, you got an accountant, a CPA, or a bunch of CPAs who are putting their license on the line to say this is correct. So, we'll want to look at it. We'll want to have the ability to examine it. But the city council, ultimately, it falls on the city. Has to make sure it's done right, because we want to make sure that the HMT is being properly used. If not, we could lose it, have to pay money back, be some pretty serious ramifications, and you don't want that to happen.
But the burden won't be on us to provide the reports. The burden is on the
Developer to, right, that's under the development agreement. He's gonna, or the company's gonna provide that information
Audit.
to the CVB, and then the CVB will in turn send it to the city. And of course, the city has auditors and CPAs on retainer.
Sorry, can I ask a dumb question really quick, or one, maybe I missed it when I spilled my juice and had to go get paper towel. The Chat Hills Capital, the developer, what is the association with Sixth Sense then? Like, what is the reason why there's two hotels on the table here? Which from a business standpoint also, I mean, begs the question, like, if we're already seeking funds to make something profitable for an investor, why are we doing two of them at the exact same time?
Yeah, so great question. The way we approached this with the Fulton County Development Authority was sort of a phased approach, and that is we're doing these 3 projects within Serenbe, but there will be different capital coming in. So Chat Hills Capital is a sponsor that's going out, that's going to ask people for money, that's going to the banks, but there's a different investor who wants to buy into a $300 million hotel versus someone who wants to buy into a more middle market hotel, right? And there's even a different investor for someone who wants to invest in aging in place. So while you have one group, Chat Hills, putting all of this together, and it's all synergistic in the sense that having people stay at this hotel, will eat at these restaurants, having people at the aging in place, buy more stuff around locally, allow us to have medical. So it's all in one area. It's all related, and it increases the revenues for everyone from a daily spend perspective, and it just increases things around Chat Hill proper as well. But there will be a different capital and equity stack for each. So with Fulton County Development Authority, we did it as one kind of property tax package for the whole thing. And similar to what we're doing here, they'll just break it up into pieces as they get started. So what we did not want to do was come back several times and ask, go through the same thing kind of 3 times. So since it's all one kind of bill package, that's why it's packaged like this, but it is choppable. So as an example, if only Hotel 1 gets funded, then that hotel motel tax will go to the city, go to you, and then a portion of it go back to the development team just for that hotel. So the only incremental tax from each project is what kind of funnels through. But we're doing it mostly because it's the same group raising the money. It's just 3 different projects. But the aging in place is not relevant here, but I'm just being open with what Chat Hills Capital is doing.
Okay.
So when you said 3 projects, or you say 3 projects, what's a 3rd project?
The aging in place you asked about already, it's not relevant to this conversation. I was just saying when she asked, what is Chat Hills Capital? It's the overseer and the sponsor for all 3 of those projects.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the property tax piece that just happened with the Fulton County development and this HMT, so multiple revenue streams will be coming in to Chat Hills Capital to develop the two hotels.
So
Is that
think
right?
about it in terms of one company that sets three different companies up. So one company, Chat Hills Capital, will sponsor three different projects. Sponsor means goes out and raises separate capital and debt for each of the three projects. So Chat Hills Capital will go out and raise capital for the Selborne Hotel. Someone who wants to invest in that will put money into that company. And there will be a debt provider that puts money in that and likes that kind of risk profile. Chat Hills Capital will set up another company, do the same thing for the wellness hotel, the larger hotel, and then the same thing for aging in place. Chat Hills Capital will not be the major owner of the project. We're just putting it together and trying to get the incentives from both you, the city, and Fulton County to make it viable for someone to come in and invest in. So we're not the actual capital coming in.
So if you do get the incentives and they're coming through, you would have multiple revenue streams going out to three multiple projects.
Yeah, you would have two revenue streams from hotel motel tax coming out to the proper hotel. So the way it will be bifurcated is Selborne Hotel collections will go to the city and then be funneled back to just the Selborne Hotel. And the wellness hub taxes will go to the city and be funneled back through, but they won't be commingled. They won't be commingled.
And any collections from other hotels, motels are not part of this incremental.
That's correct.
So we're only talking about moving funds that come from these properties back to these properties.
Correct. They don't exist now, so we don't have them.
Exactly.
And if they are built and we start getting hotel motel tax because of the guests that are staying there, that money for a period of time will go back to this
Right.
projects.
And this IGA is the city, the CBD, and Chat Hills Capital.
No,
It's not.
the IGA is only between the city and the CVB. And then the development agreement is between the CVB and the developer.
On that topic, in the IGA on Article 2, section number 2.4.
2.4.
2.4. In furtherance of the public purpose for which the CVB was created in order to carry out the requirements, the CVB agrees to enter into a development agreement with the developer on terms and conditions to be negotiated by the CVB with the developer.
Correct.
So in adopting the IGA with the city, we are agreeing to development agreement, correct?
Not to a final form developer agreement, but in principle, you're agreeing to enter into a development agreement with the city. But I think what we, sorry, go ahead.
But if you didn't come to terms,
Right,
like if you didn't accept the terms of the development agreement, one, you don't have to accept this one.
right.
But then we wouldn't have this IGA while it's in effect is really kind of null and void because there's nothing happening under it. So you don't have to enter the development agreement. But in order for all this to start happening, yes, you have to enter into, and is this being proposed to the development agreement with the developer? And I forget the name, but
Who's the appropriate signatory
Chat Hills.
for these agreements? Who
Will be the
signs?
chick, well,
Is
in
it the
this
city
particular
that
case,
signs these agreements?
probably the mayor will sign for half the city. And then I would say it would be the chairman of the CVB, but because Steve has a conflict here, Mike, it'd probably be you.
Okay.
The development agreement's a pretty long document and a lot of the verbiage is assuming that we would take over fiduciary responsibility as a CVB on that, in that regard. And I know you mentioned that it would kind of fall on the city for audits and I don't know, insurance, legality, legal representation, all that stuff. Is that true? If we assume the fiduciary responsibility that outlines in the development agreement?
All right, now we're going to get back into another area of the law. As a government agency, you get to enjoy, to a certain extent, sovereign immunity, which means it's very difficult to for someone to sue individual members or even the agency itself, the agency maybe for breach of contract or something like that, but for liability purposes, you're pretty much immune from suit. Now, that's not a given for every situation, but pretty much immune as long as you're acting in good faith. Now, if you were to abscond with money, different story. You've acted outside your authority. But if you're trying to supervise and you make a mistake, okay, people are human, right? You're protected. All right. But you certainly can ask the city if there's a way to include the CVB under the insurance policy that the city has in place. I just don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Got it. Thank you.
Janice, did you want to? I know you had a couple questions.
I'm
Sorry.
sorry. I just still want to be sure that.
I have another question I can ask
Go
you
ahead.
next time, if that's okay. So I mean, from previous conversation, the way this was positioned was there's a bank interested, like, to give a loan.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there's a lot of investors involved here and potentially not all the money is locked up for each one of these projects. So my question is, if there is a bank that, like, we're trying to get a loan from, we've been provided any of the information around that this is actually a requirement to get to a financial position that makes sense? Like, you know, without
great
having
question.
information to, like,
it's not
say
that
that it's
one.
actually needed.
It's exactly what the Fulton County Development Authority asked for, and they have kind of a package that you put together that shows a with and without the incentives. Otherwise, why do you get the incentives at all, right? And as part of that, there's three parties. There's JLL, which is a capital markets team that goes out and raises debt and equity. There was First Horizon Bank, which is just a bank, a regional bank, and then there was Kraft, which is a local bank around here. And so what we had to present to Fulton County Development Authority, which we can send you because it's all public record and I'd send you anyway, it shows exactly that. It says each of them said basically the same thing. We need a 1.2 debt service coverage ratio, and we need a cash on cash return of above, oh gosh, it's either 20 or 12%. I'm not a math guy, but there's some threshold, right? And so then they took all of the models and they looked at it with the incentives and without and compared and said, okay, so you do need this, and we'll sign off on it. But is
there any, like, restrictions around timing when you're working with a bank, for example? So, like, 15 years sounds like a really long time. If this thing is booming in 5 years, it seems like we put a lot out on the table for such a long period of time, and especially to be doing it for 2 hotels at the same time. That's why I was saying it makes a lot of business sense that we maybe sign off on one of them, and, like, then that proves out the business case for the other, right?
right.
So like, how? Yeah, help me think through that.
So the answer is you're right, but in normal times. So times are not so good right now. What we have a problem with in our models is basically how much debt we can get and what the interest rates are. And so the answer is yes, 15 years sounds like a long time, but whenever you're getting a loan and you have to pay a lot of interest, you have to have, the banks are basically looking at this as insurance that they're going to get paid back, right? And so having it out there for the term of the loan in 15 years is kind of the outside. I know that you can do 50, but we kind of pulled it back because that's all we needed before we planned to exit out. But the answer is you're typically right. The problem is that debt's very, very expensive, right? It wasn't when we first started. I mean, we just came to you guys, I think, in the last 6 months when things changed. But we need it for an extended period of time because we won't cover our debt service coverage ratio for those years on the outside of the debt.
So I assume during the negotiation process, then all of this is debatable timeline, as well as if interest rates changes and refinancing, like all of those things are on the table for how this, like, ends up coming together.
So yes, for part. So certainly if interest rates come back down to 2% and costs all of a sudden come down,
yeah,
it's a good guy. Yes, there's a world where things get so good that our model changes and we didn't actually need this. That is certainly a world.
Yeah.
We don't think we're in that space right now,
yeah,
and we don't know that we will be in the foreseeable future. And the best guidance that we're getting is even through this year, maybe rate certainly level off. Maybe they even come down a little bit, but there's not going to be a significant drop in interest rates over the foreseeable future. And so the answer is yes, you're right. It could happen that way, but we're not sure that it will happen that way. And our banks won't get comfortable betting on a future improvement of life versus kind of where they are now. So our banks are only lending on their projection of future cash flows. They're not.
Sure. I just meant that the contract itself could be written such that when conditions do change, if they do, that there would be differences like in how you would get this.
At a cost.
Yeah.
So I would think so too.
Yeah.
The problem is the banks won't do that. They don't want this benefit to be able to end because they're considering this basically as their collateral for making the loan, right? And so if it can stop, it impacts their modeling, which makes it hard for us to get the loan. So it's like a chicken and an egg. Yes, it could be better, but the banks won't bet on that for us. It's kind of the issue. And we can't get the bank to sign off on the same contract that we could enter into with you.
Which bank are you guys?
So First Horizon is probably our most likely, but Kraft wants to try to syndicate it, but they're not big enough to syndicate the larger project. But at First Horizon's are most likely.
So I have a question. So these hotels could possibly impact other lodging, hotels and motels in the area. If this causes their revenue to decrease, it will also cause our revenue that we're collecting to decrease. So is it standard for us to give the percentage that they're asking for, or could we give less because of the impact that it's going to have?
Well, you would have any right to set it up any way you would like to, right? You can say, well, look, this is the only way that I'm willing to play in the game with you guys. But what I'm hearing is that the banks are saying it's got to be this way or we're not going to lend. Banks are notoriously conservative. They want to avoid all risks that they can. And, so I'm not surprised that the banks are insisting, at least from what I'm hearing, that this is the agreement we will accept as adequate collateral to extend the loan. So to answer your question, yeah, you could have an agreement like that. That would be a legal agreement. We could draft it up like that, but it doesn't sound like it'd be something that would work for the other side.
I can tell you what we've done from our side to sort of help with that. We had to get feasibility studies, and they looked at basically your exact question: would there be demand to fill these hotels? And the answer is the wellness hotel is at a price point which will not decrease the revenues from the other hotels because there's not that comparable product anywhere kind of around here. And then on the Selborne Hotel, that was your midweek, your corporate client who wants to do an event that doesn't impact sort of the current hotel system anyway, which is basically your weekend sort of traveler at a different price point. So it's a good question in the sense that we had to look at it, and the feasibility study says that we'll be able to pull new customers, not those from the existing hotels.
Thank you.
And is there a reason why the Inn at Serenby, which has been around for 10+ years, is not considered a comp? I mean, they're getting great room rates. Why is it not a comp?
So it's certainly not a comp for the wellness hotel. And the reason we don't allow it to be a comp, or what we've argued with our feasibility study provider that it's not a comp, is they cannot handle conventions. So I think there's just too few rooms, and you could probably speak to it better, but they turn a lot of convention business away, which is what we're saying, not convention, corporate business away, right? We're going to have a retreat, 100 people from Chick-fil-A. I'm making it up, want to stay. They can't stay at the Inn in Serenby, it's just too small, right? So this hotel will accommodate. It's going to be geared more towards that corporate component. There'll be a place to have meetings and all of these things that in a bigger grand ballroom style that's not really available.
But they do, I mean, help us. I just want to understand, because it doesn't make sense to me, because you guys do corporate retreats and meetings.
You look at all the analysts,
Yeah.
room doesn't give you. I mean, it's gonna be, if this is, I've been trying to raise money for 20 years. You can have several options, but I had to liquidate stuff I would rather have on the balance sheet. They wouldn't even lend me my Midtown property against that property. The banks will not believe in South. This is why We got unanimous vote for both, and nothing's happening down, whether it's up, whether it's opposite. You know. Nobody believe in housing, we'll keep the housing going. We'll see how tough it is, nobody else has broken ground, because everybody else is having to rely on that. If I hadn't had the property, what you see in Saturday was still good. If I hadn't relied on a loan.
Just real quick, do you think without this, it's a 0% chance that these two hotels will get off the ground at all?
Selborne Hotel, I did try to get. It's the first we got.
So you,
Before the banks.
Yeah. so you pretty much think it's probably a 0%?
It was, yeah, I mean, right now, we can't, we're here, we've been trying this. You know, this didn't just happen when we applied. We've been working on this for 2+ years. And this is where we are. We've got the project, we've got the costing, and we've got the conditions. The banks say they'll do it under these, or that they believe they will.
Well, I think that's the thing for me personally is that you guys, it seems like you guys have been working on it for 2 years and we just found out about it last month. And so the level of transparency as we go through this, I think would have been helpful for us to get through this quicker.
At the beginning, we weren't incentive. I mean, we're working on a lot of things.
Yeah.
So if you look at our master plan, all this is on our master plan. This isn't a secret.
No, not the master plan.
Well, I think what she's bringing up is the fact that we were given this information to review on July 8th, asking for a vote on July 10th. It was a holiday week and we felt rushed to make a vote. And I'm speaking for everyone here.
Granted,
because
but you
we've
can
had the
see how
conversation.
complicated this is.
I don't
Even when
disagree
we
with that.
presented it to you, it wasn't packaged enough. It created more questions than it did answers.
Right.
We have been working, Dan, Brent, to get some documents to understand state law, working with Rick. This isn't like we understood it all and withheld it. This was trying to present as it was coming forward. So this wasn't something that, so number one, I've been working for the hotel forever. We were not counting on incentives. The bank came back and said, in this state, this is what you can do. And here's what you should be doing. And this will make it, you know, this will give us something that gives us credibility we can look at. So this has been a within 6-month period that we have started adding this to the model.
Understand.
So, Rick, if I could, we're voting today just on the interagency agreement, intergovernmental agreement, correct?
I don't know. Is that the only issue? Or are you gonna vote on the
I
development
didn't
agreement?
realize the vote was today. I thought this was our workshop to get all of our questions answered. Was I?
And I'm still a little confused how the IGA is like explicitly verbally like linked to the development agreement and how we separate and manage those two today.
It speaks to the developer, but it doesn't say,
It has development agreement in there.
yeah, it does, yeah.
Can I say what we would like to happen? And then you can see if that's good. or bad.
Sure.
I'd like for it to be linked. I would like for you to
Right.
have both
Done.
documents that say, and I want the city to look at the same document and say,
Right.
yes, this is what we all approve on
Right.
versus doing one and then the other.
And then
Right.
the other.
Which I think is what was the concept behind sending them both. was
Right.
We like them both or we don't like them.
That makes sense. Rick, can I ask you about that? I know stuff has been talked about like Alpharetta CVB and other CVBs that have done this. We're not set up as a private CVB right now or a 501c6.
Correct.
From
No.
what I understand, that Alpharetta is set up as a private.
That's my understanding. I spoke with their executive director
Okay,
earlier this week,
Okay.
and they are a private CVB. In a way, a private CVB works
Yeah.
as opposed to a public body CVB, as you guys are. A private CVB cannot be controlled by the city.
Okay.
It can have membership on the board,
Yeah.
but it cannot be controlled. So in Alpharetta, for an example, there are 13 members on its board. 5 of whom are city officials, and they're whoever holds certain positions, like the mayor's on there, city managers on there, et cetera. 5 other board members are representatives of the local hotels. So the hotels vote on a slate of folks, and then they pick 5 people to sit on this board, I guess, on a yearly or 2, whatever, a certain period of time. And then the remaining 3 are certain positions or people who hold positions in Alpharetta, one being the manager of Avalon up there, the other one being the manager of the amphitheater up there, and the last one being the general manager of North Point Mall. And so the city has seats, 5 of them,
Right.
but it cannot control the vote.
Got it.
Okay.
And- Go ahead.
Okay.
No, you go, Carter.
Hey,
Yes, no.
Rick, I sent you a couple questions the other day, I'm kind of coming in late to the game, post-retirement. Can you hear me at all out there? And one of the biggest issues was, the legal interpretation, by, I guess you or what legal counsel was going to be brought to bear as far as saying everything here is a legitimate use of the CBB and we're on good legal ground, because I think we were all confused. I mean, I've been 35 years in the government and a pretty intense job, and I came away from it thinking, well, man, I just can't wrap my head around this. And I think a lot of us felt the same way. It would behoove us to have your interpretation or someone's interpretation that says everything we're doing as this board in doing to pull this off is legal and has standing in other communities. And one of my other questions was, what specific other communities or municipalities or projects have followed the same kind of lines of which we're engaged now? So that was.
Well, I have learned more about hotel motel tax
Me too.
in the last couple of months than I ever thought I would. And actually, it's good because I'm going to put my shingle out there and say I'm a hotel motel tax. But anyway, I've done a lot of research on this. Besides just diving into the code section, I've read case law on this. I've read law review articles on this. I have talked with many folks around. Dan McCrae, who I think is still on Zoom. He and I have had a telephone conversation and an email. We were emailing this week to get my head wrapped around some components of this that I had some concerns with. I'm not going to say I thought, oh, this can't happen. Tell me how this can happen. Again, there are lots of debates out there about whether or not public money should be ever used for private developments or whatever. But as a practical matter, that's the world we live in. If Georgia were to say we're not going to allow this type of financing scheme any longer, well, guess what? Everything's going to go to Alabama, Tennessee, the Carolinas, and Florida. If somebody wants to locate in the Southeast, they're not going to come to Georgia. So Georgia has allowed and has set up different incentives for companies to come here and develop. And one of them is a hotel motel tax that we can use for the different components. I mean, you got to do promoting tourism and whatnot. You can also take government money if there's a public use and a public benefit to help build. That's how the Truist Stadium was built. Okay. And so if you can take the different little tranches of the hotel motel tax and properly apply it and properly use it, it's all legal. And believe me, I have dived through this. I have sliced and diced it up. And I will tell you from my review of this, it is legal.
Okay, great.
Now, it's up to you guys if you want to do it. It's up to city council if they want to do it. But from a legal perspective, it meets the smell test.
Great. And now, any issues that you have? I know we've thrown our issues up in questions over the last, month or two. Are there any issues you see or red flags or anything that you would say that you question about it at all? I mean, we want to go into this with 100%.
Right. The one question I had for Dan today, actually this week, was the public use component, okay, for dealing with the parking lots, the traffic circles, but also some of the other components, the lodging, the museum, the green roof to table part of it, whatever the educational part of it, the access ability to at least the common areas at no charge, but then being open. It's not a private like membership club. It's not like we're setting up a private golf club or something. It's a hotel that anybody can go in and pay the rent for the night, whatever, right? And it does meet that test, but that was probably of all of the different issues I was going through. Okay, will this fit? Will this fit? Will this fit? That was the one that I wanted to get my head wrapped around. If this was a convention center, convention hall that Chattahoochee Hills was going to own, okay, would be our product, and we're going out there and maybe having a revenue bond issuance or something to construct, and we want to try and deal with a hotel motel tax or something to help manage it or whatever. That's what Alpharetta did. Then okay, that was easy for me to get my head wrapped around. But this one, right now, it will have ownership, at least a component part of it, by the Fulton County Development Authority. That makes it legal. Okay. But eventually, if everything comes to play, and I know Steve wants it to, and I know everybody on his team wants it to come to play, it will be held by a private company. And so when it transitions to that, that was my concern. And again, my conversations with Dan, email conversations with Dan, and also doing some more work, doing a little more research, whatever, I'm comfortable with it. So to answer your question, I know it was a long answer, but I'm comfortable with the all the components of both the development agreement and the IGA. But you guys have to decide whether or not you're comfortable with how the money's being spent, how it's being directed. But again, from a legal perspective, it's okay.
Okay, great.
And to the other part of your question, we stole the idea from Douglas County. So it was basically what they did at Fox Hall to approve the West, and they went through this same thing, and you can go online and find it. But they were using the entire hotel motel tax. I think what we wanted to do with you, since you're in the best position to spend the 1%, was leave some here so that you can advertise for Chat Hills proper. But we stole it from our neighbor. They're not off the ground yet, but that's where we got the idea. Then we started looking at other states. So what you said earlier, some do the exact opposite. So in Houston, they'll give you an incentive to build a hotel and then give you the hotel motel tax from other future hotels that are built, because now you've created this nexus of like stuff coming in. So it's some cities will do even more, and they'll go longer. So what we're asking for, I know you don't have comparisons in front of you, but it's a much tighter, smaller ask than what you might find online if you search something for hotel mode. But we stole it from our neighbor. This is basically where we got it.
And they use the CBB of Douglas County.
Don't make me quote that. I don't remember. I don't remember what body they used. But they had to move it through. They had to move it through a nonprofit of some sort.
Can we find out what that body was so that we understand the comparison?
Sure.
Mike, I'm
didn't
happy to do that. I'm actually traveling right now on the link trip, and Chris Humphrey, who's the head of their development authorities, here with me. And I just talked to him yesterday just to confirm that they are in fact using both the hotel motel tax and the property tax increment to fund this thing. But to the point, if there are questions about specifically what the agencies are and all of that, I can ask them tonight.
Because I would love to see like a public body, an example of a public body filtering this through versus the private CVB in Alpharetta or whatever organization they use in Douglas County.
Yeah, I think another thing, Rick, was the interest of how do future developments, pose? How can they be incentivized, or is there a restriction on how many entities can come forward and say we would like something similar going forward? Because the pressure is on Chat Hills as far as development and interest in our community.
Well, they would have, if another hotel came or some other proposed development that would like to use a hotel motel tax, they would have to pretty much go through the same hoops. I mean, you're going to have to get the development authority involved in this, because you're going to have some kind of public component. Well, I'm going to say that you could use the tourism part, but if you're going to put in that first 3 pennies of the HMT, you're going to have some type of public ownership, some part of the project, whether it's just the land or something that's been deeded to them that eventually gets back to the private developer. So, if future developers come in and want to do something similar, they'll have to pretty much meet the same criteria.
And then how would we keep, we were talking earlier about keeping in compliance, I guess, as that public-private lines get blurred as things move forward. How would you see that being executed? Like, is that just us boots
Well-
on the ground, like making sure?
Well, we have to do it right now for the city.
Okay.
With the hotel motel tax we
Okay.
currently collect. A certain percentage can go to the general fund and be spent for city services, fire, police, whatever. But then a certain percentage has to be spent on promoting tourism. And Robbie has the wonderful task of making sure that the monies that are being spent from the hotel motel tax properly fit those different categories. So
Gotcha.
what's happening here, there'll just be a couple more categories because of where it has to go and how it has to be spent. But the accountants are going to look at that, and our auditors look at the hotel motel tax every year. Because I talked to Robbie about it multiple times a year to make sure that we're staying in compliance.
But if we were a private CVB, we would have to be responsible for that.
No, I mean, it ultimately falls to the city. The
Okay.
city's always going to be the one that's final day responsible. You're the conduit. You have responsibility to look at the audit. You can't just throw it to the side. But ultimately it falls on the city council, the city, to be sure that the monies are being spent properly.
And Kara,
But I
to
would
be
also say
clear,
this, because the risk is that monies that were improperly spent, improperly allocated, maybe is a better way of saying it, are at risk of being taken back, or whatever happened in College Park. Too much money was being given to the GCCC, if I'm using the right.
GICC.
Right, coming from the top 3% of the 8%
Right.
sales, HMT.
Right.
You think of it as 1.5, but College Park was spending too much on the direct marketing organization part of it, and not enough on the promoting tourism. And I don't know what the second chapter was of that. I just saw the report that said it was a lot of money. That, okay, how are we going to make this up? So the developer has a vested interest in making sure that every penny is properly spent, because you don't want to lose that. And you certainly don't want to lose the ongoing stream of the hotel motel tax.
And on top, Robbie, doesn't DCA also audit the city?
Yes.
yes,
We have to do 2 reports to DCA every year. They're monitoring the enforcement entities, Department of Revenue. That's who you don't hear.
So you got a lot of people looking at it. I mean, to try and make you feel comfortable is, and everybody's interest ought to be, should be, and I think will be, that they're all properly spent, but they have to be tracked.
And Rick, I'm assuming you'll have an availability session with the city council. I mean, you've
Mhm.
spoken with them about their impressions about the project.
Right, I've already told them that Ian could call me and talk to me, and I'd spend time with them on the phone or come over here and meet. I know we're having work session on the 6th or whatever that Thursday is, beginning at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with the meeting that night. So it'll be stump the lawyer time again.
can I just offer a point of clarity to Kara, I think you said something about, private CVB. To
Yeah.
be clear, our CVB is an entity of the city, right? It's a convention, it's not a private CVB, so.
Right. Understand. And what are, go ahead. I'm asking too many questions.
No, you're not. So looking at the development agreement, Steve, if I could ask you. So on that 3%, the first 3%. Then there is the 2%, which is split. The CVB would get 1, you're asking for 1. And then the 1.5 at the 8% level would go to the DMO. But on the portions that are being moved back to you, would all that go to product, or is any of that for tourism?
That would all go to product as we have it now for various things within the product.
Okay, thank you.
The 1% split with you will be spent on tourism. So the 2%, that'll be split 1 and 1.
And your portion will be spent on tourism.
Marketing for Chattahoochee proper / the hotel.
Okay. Thank you.
And when you say tourism, does that mean future positions with the CVB, paying salaries, travel, et cetera, to promote tourism?
It's basically, it's that amount that's gonna be on our pro forma for marketing. So rather than it coming to the bureau, the bank likes to see it, so it kind of guarantees that we're marketing, so that comes out of our budget, so it goes against that, so
I'm
that.
talking about the CVB 1%, so our 1%.
Oh, no, that comes to the
tourism.
CVB to use the CVB in the general CMB budget.
Right, but that. Is tourism considered a hired position like an executive director 3 years
I
down the
think it's
road?
just-
That's where I don't
It's
know the
everything
legal.
legal for the CVB.
Uh-huh.
It just goes into the CVB funds to be used with everything else that's legal for the CVB funds.
God, I guess that's a question I'm asking.
There's no
Is it
separation
legal
once it
for that
hits,
for a
once it
hire-
hits the
for a
budget.
Hiring position down the road in 2-3 years.
Yes.
Right, if you have an executive director who's responsible for overseeing marketing efforts
Right.
and promotional efforts and
That
whatever
1%
you
can be
guys are
used.
doing, right, that's promoting tourism.
Okay.
And if you had an executive director who's building roads, that would not be, right? I know I'm trying to be silly here, I guess a little bit extreme, but that 1% that is coming from this incremental HMT, the hotel motel tax coming from these two hotels, the 1% going to the CVB can be spent any way you guys want to spend it, as long as it's within your legal authority.
Great.
I had a question about CBBs. To develop the litmus test for a city to create a CBB, I guess all CBBs are created by a city or municipality.
Actually created by the General Assembly.
Okay.
We requested a local act be considered and enacted by the General Assembly a couple of years ago, and they did that. And so your entity is actually created by the Georgia legislature, but at the request of the city.
Right across the city. And making the determination between a private CBB versus a public, that's confusing to me.
Yeah, and what probably the best way to try and understand this is that when we're talking about the private entity, we shouldn't call it CVB. I know they do. I mean, like the Atlanta CVB is a private entity. But it could be, to answer your question, Janice, it could be any 501c6.
Right.
The chambers of commerce are 501c6. Probably every one of them, but they all should. I don't know if they are, but they should be. There are other entities that are similar like that can be 501c6. Certain trade organizations can be that. So as long as it's 501c6,
A private entity, you're fine.
right, it just cannot be publicly created.
Okay.
Sorry, Rick, and I'm still confused by the DMO. Can you help me understand like how it fits into this and like, does it have to be, it has to be created for this agreement to get actually come to life? Or like what?
No,
Okay.
for us to get the city.
Yeah.
To get the 8% hotel motel tax, we're gonna have to have a DMO. And I picked the brains of a couple of folks who I've spoken with here in the last few weeks about why did the General Assembly do this? It makes no sense to me. Why you gotta have a separate 501c6 that's gonna get part of your hotel motel tax when you already have 2 cents of every dollar that has to go to either a public CVB like this body or some state agency or something. Nobody could answer. Who knows why it became part of the law, but it is. And I'm sure it was some deal with some city or some county that maybe had a 501c6 already designated and they wanted to make sure they got funds. You never know why things get in the sausage, but it's there.
So which body then creates the DMO?
The DMO,
Yeah.
not the city. City can be the instigator of it and
Okay.
say, we want this to happen, but some private person or, lowly attorney gets to create the DMO, but it's got to be not controlled by the governing body.
Or we just hire one.
Or you can hire.
So if Atlanta is a private, I heard you say.
Okay.
Atlanta's
Yeah, it actually was
private.
created,
What's
the Atlanta CVB was created like 100 years ago, like in the 20s, the last 20s. And my guess is some of what maybe has driven how the hotel motel tax law has been written probably influenced greatly by the Atlanta CVP. I don't know that, I'm speculating, but I bet it's a pretty good speculation.
Okay, so the DMO is required for the first part of the agreement, which was to bring up the hotel motel tax to 8%. That was why the DMO came into play in the documents we had. And it has nothing to do with it.
Correct, they're just following the law.
Okay,
on that.
with the contract with the developer.
Right, because if
Okay.
again, if there's not a DMO that the city can use, whether it's contracted or whatever, then we can't get to the 8%. We can't charge the 8% hotel motel tax. So that's separate and apart from this. That's got to happen if we want to get to 8%.
Got it. When you go on the site for the Convention and Visitors Bureau Association, many of them are DMOs. They kind of use those terms simultaneously, but the ones that are have formed themselves as 501c6.
Right.
And that's how they can function as a DMO. They're a private entity. They're not part of a government. Got it.
And to be clear, what we're not asking is that all 8% get routed to this new DMO that's being forwarded to us, which you could do under the law, right? But we want to keep it routed through you, both from a timing perspective, and also to give you 1% to have, some budget to play with, I guess, and to advertise. But it theoretically could all go through the new DMO, separate and apart.
But we would still have access to the percent, like that 1% we're collecting now from
We're basically
Well,
reducing our revenue. Yes.
revenue that we don't have.
No,
Revenue that
would
would not
have.
come if it
right,
did
they're
not
not,
come.
the proposal is only incremental HMT, and
Yeah.
I think that's very important. I'm assuming everybody
So the
understands.
funds that we currently
Right, so the
get from
funds you currently
end-
get, you're still gonna get.
Great.
It's, and in addition to that, with the incremental HMT, you're going to get 1 penny of that.
Right.
Okay, so once these hotels are built and heads are placed on the beds, then you'll start to get an increase. Not as much as you'll get 15 years later,
But we will
but
get
you
some portion of that, right?
And the city gets property taxes.
right, I mean, and then the sales tax, because that still comes in, and liquor tax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So building these hotels, however it's done, will benefit the city. I
Yeah.
mean, they will have a positive impact as far as revenue for the city.
Quick, just another question that popped in my head. All of these other examples we're talking about are in public space. They're not, I haven't seen any that have been in neighborhoods. Whether that's right or wrong, it's just how it works. I know there's signs throughout Serenbe particular about guests and who is allowed there and who's not on their trails and whatnot, for good reason, is people are living there. How are we working in public space when we market this hotel for Chattahoochee Hills? How do we not confuse that and it be open in a public way that people feel safe about?
It's I know I keep saying this, it's a really good question, because we asked the same thing. How can we make it publicly accessible? So the issue we're trying to avoid are just basically pictures in Serenbe and someone selling, right? That's sort of the gist. And so the way we've threaded that needle is to make everything publicly accessible, but pictures can't be used for commercial use. So it keeps paparazzi or someone from taking photos and selling them online.
Okay.
So yes, and so everything will be accessible to the public. You just can't sell photos.
Okay.
But we thought about that and added
Okay.
that.
And being public, this is why there's the list. If lodging, golf courses, all this sort of thing. I think one of the best examples that Dan made it real clear is, I forget what county it is, but there was a country club. They used the tax for the golf course where anyone could actually play golf. Now, they still charged you.
Right.
They could not use it on the club because you had to be a member to go to the club.
Got it.
So that's a good, sometimes public, you think that's just, that doesn't mean you.
I understand you have to exchange money for whatever,
That's right.
whether you're going to wherever, just thinking about it holistically from a
Yeah.
opening up standpoint.
And Steve, if I read this correctly, the rooftop garden will be open to the public. They can walk through that. Is that
That's
correct?
correct on the luxury hotel. We from records, Six Senses has asked us not to identify them because we haven't gone public with it. So that's why we have not really referred to them.
And I guess one last question, so even after the 15 years and it's owned by a private business, it will still have the public access. Always.
That,
Yeah.
maybe I should tackle that question. So the answer is, I can't see why it would not. Now, what I don't know is, let's say we built the hotels. It became popular. 15 years from now, we sell the hotel. I don't know if we can lock them into what they would do with the specific hotels. But everything we control, we could put that.
But that would mean the hotel would turn into a private club, which is
Right.
probably totally unfeasible.
Right, and I think you could, if you wanted to, put a deed restriction in there that like the rooftop garden, if there is one,
Right.
will always be open to the public.
That's
You know, you could have something like that that's
The
in there.
parking garage, maybe.
Right.
Right. And, you know, the parking garage and the traffic circles
And
will not be
restrooms.
dedicated to the city. They're going to be maintained by the property owner, I guess, or the management company, whatever. But they'll be accessible to the public. So it's good. I mean, it's a benefit. The city doesn't worry about paving it and repairing it and whatnot, but traffic circles and parking decks, assuming would help a lot with the traffic in Serenbe. Currently exists and will, you know, as it grows, gets more.
So that would mean that at some point in the future, and this is a very fringe case, but everyone who lives in Serenbe, for some reason, wants to have gates around Serenbe. And that's part of what is proposed at HOA because there's so much traffic and there's all this new stuff happening. At that point, then now you're excluding the public from getting in to access these properties.
Our zoning doesn't allow that.
You have restaurants. I don't
Yeah.
think it ever
Yeah.
gates.
Yeah. Okay.
During the day. I mean, you can't, because the restaurant is failed.
Tom said zoning will never allow.
Our zoning doesn't allow for developments to be gated.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess you too, you've looked at maybe the increase in service needs, you know, as we get hotels in here, you know, we're gonna, of course, more houses and everything, increasing. You know, fire, you know, police protection or such as that.
And you have two studies that are required under the development agreement. It's in Article 7, if I remember correctly. The M-Plan Economic Impact Analysis and the, if I'm gonna say it right, LOCI, L-O-C-I, or LOCI. Both of those deal with fiscal impact and actual impact, you know, studies. Again, I mean, estimate of what it will cost to have this project in your community and what the benefit would be. So one of the requests that was made of me was that if you guys would at some point vote to commission to have the Loki study, the developer is going to pay for it, but it would be better if it came from the CVB as opposed from the developer. That way, it's like, look, Georgia Tech, we want you to do it from the city's perspective and don't even give the appearance that you've been influenced at all by the developer. So that request has been made that when you're ready to consider this, if you want to go forward, have the CVB enter into the contract with Georgia Tech for that study, but the developer will pay for it.
What's the study? I'm sorry, Mr.
That one's the, I think that's the fiscal impact, the Loki, L-O-C-I.
Yes,
Um,
723.
Yeah, so that's what does it cost? What fire trucks, additional police, firemen, services, you know, getting roads that need to be paved or whatever the cost is. So what are the costs that will be incurred by the city? and then compare that to what are the benefits, the extra employees that are being paid, the patrons that are coming here and spending money, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so that study needs to be done, and the M plan, which is from what I did some study on this, a little research on it, similar, but not so much on the fiscal side, is more of how many employees, how many folks, whatever else, but combined, it'll give you a lot of good information.
You know, to be clear too, I mean, a lot of the impacts are being handled inside of the approvals for the hotel buildings, actually. Things like the requirement for the fire truck that the developer is going to have to buy. There are several things that we've already required in terms of, you know, access and things that they're having to do, the roads and all of that. And that's all stuff that they're paying for. And the other side of that from the city's perspective is that, you know, the year that those hotels open, it adds a couple $1 million a year to our property taxes. And, you know, you consider that right now, we're only getting just over a couple $1 million a year in property taxes. It has a big impact from the city from a financial perspective.
I'm ready for the bar.
You're not talking about test, right? Why lawyers call it a bar.
Oh, yeah.
Mike, if I may make a suggestion or just a request, why don't we take a 5-minute break? Let everybody stretch your legs, and if anybody wants to do private stump a lawyer, happy to talk to folks during the break and then come back and continue.
That sounds great. Take a 5-minute recess. Carter, did you want to bring up a question I think you had?
It was just based on insurance. You know, I spent a long time in emergency response with EPA, and they don't like you to, they don't mind if you're not consistent with their policies, but they don't like you inconsistent. So a lot of us actually took out personal liability insurance because, you know, if we get into a big site, a Superfund site or anything like that, anything's done that, you know, a litigant thinks is, you know, beyond the scope of what we do, they encouraged us to have our own personal insurance. I know that was fleshed around with the group. Do we need that, or does the city going to send out something that says we're, you know, we're covered under, as long as we're consistent with the way we're supposed to operate, are we going to be covered under the insurance, the city's insurance policy?
That's a good question. So that question should be asked, but I will tell you this. I've been representing local government since '91 and a lot of different governments and agencies and whatnot. And I've never seen any government body that I've represented where the individual board members or agency members have been held personally liable. And I'm trying to think if any of them have ever even been sued individually. Now, that being said, Brookhaven had misstepped, and at least trial court issued, the jury came back against the city manager and maybe one of the council members individually, but there was some extenuating circumstances in that, and it's being appealed, so I don't know if it'll actually stick. But and since '91 and all the government bodies that I've represented, I've never seen it happen. But I still think it's a good question. It should be asked, and you should get an answer on it.
And I think the only reason we would ask that and wonder that is, I don't think I personally would wonder it if I was just sitting on the CVB, being a CVB. But since this is a new thing, kind of a new concept, there's questions there that we just want to feel secure about.
And again, to be personally liable when you're acting as as part of a government body, you really have to do something egregious. I mean, or really, really grossly negligent. You know, making decisions, debating issues, trying to do your job. You're not expert accountants, and nobody would hold you to that. So, as I think, who was I talking to during the break about being sure to make sure that you take a vote and look at the audit report. One of you guys I was talking to during the break. Oh, thank you, Brooke. I couldn't remember who I was talking to. That if this happens and if you start getting reports, then I think you need to have the city attorney, whoever he or she might be at that time, come to those meetings at least the first couple of years when you're receiving it to say, let's go through it, let's look at it, and then, accept it. If it's acceptable, probably would be, and then vote to send it on to the city for their consideration. So first couple of times I would go through that, then I would think become pretty standard. Okay, now we know what we need to do. But that's, a few years down the road if this passes.
Hey, Carter. Am I, yeah, I just wanted to, just as a personal aside, two things. Robbie checked with our insurer and all of our commissions and groups are covered under our policy. And when I became mayor, I checked that with my insurance, my personal insurance agent, and I actually they added a rider to my umbrella policy for a couple $100 that is like, that third or fourth layer of coverage. So it's not a bad question. To Rick's point, I don't think there's actually much risk here. Probably more risk for me than for you guys. But again, it's something that you can get coverage for if you want to be absolutely certain.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, that's true. And we have, when we turn our insurance in and get our insurance, we have to put in there, how many employees we have, how many volunteers we have, and we list volunteers, all the boards and commissions, which you guys are. And, in Brookhaven, as Rick talked about, the city manager, a friend of mine and the mayor, they both got sued. That's over annexation issue, but again, it's getting appealed, but they're covered under the insurance there too, so.
I just had a question for Brent and Steve on the development agreement. The IGA agreement, I believe, was a 30-year term. And the development agreement is a 30-year term. But the incentive is a
Well, it's maximum of 30 years, but the allocation of the hotel motel tax is a 15-year period. And that just gives them time to get everything in play. But once that the incentive, the HMT has been paid over to the developer for 15 years, it'll end at that point.
That is.
So I don't think it'll ever get to 30, but could it get to 20? Maybe.
And how would it get?
If it didn't start for the
If it
first
didn't
5 years,
start.
if it started tomorrow, it'd be 15 years,
Thanks.
but that's not going to happen. You got to build the facilities first.
Right. And Steve, it seemed like there was a little bit of different language on the public access to the wellness development versus the hotel. Is there thoughts of some other public type of programming there?
Well, here's to sort of jump through various things that all the legal people think's okay. I read that and there's several instances with anything that's open to the public, even though there's a fee.
Right.
There's, I guess, some tranches that is true public. So this is where we have added that garden to the roof.
Right.
I think it's just articulating the different features of the different spaces. So
Gotcha.
as an example, the wellness hotel will have a green roof. The other one's not gonna have a green roof. The Selborne Hotel will have convention space that can be used by the public. So, the wellness won't. So it's just articulating different.
And the Selborne has a public green space. So it's more to outline what the places are rather than
The usage.
the usages. We're nothing, no portion of it is private, or if it were, we couldn't use the funds for it.
So if another entity came forward, let's say Bear Creek Nature Center wanted to build something, the CVB or the city would enter into another agreement.
Well, could the CVB be used to promote Bear Creek Nature Center?
Well, no, I know
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
but
it
let's say they want TPD funds.
Well, they'd
They
have to
want
meet the qualifications
well,
for that.
They submit a proposal to develop a facility.
Right. And you could consider it. But it doesn't mean you have to do it. You know, so if it's something that,
But we're not.
That-
This is not exclusive. We could still enter into another development.
well,
agreement.
correct.
Because to
and-
get that 8%, when this incentive is over, I think we still have to be spending that 1.5% on product.
Correct, you'd have to have a project.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Lori about other projects that the city could possibly have, Beaver House, whatever. But, and understand that, again, this is the incremental
No, I,
HMT, so you still have the current HMT that you can spend on, and you'll have to identify some well, not you, the city will have to identify projects. I mean, you can recommend, but the city will have to, if it wants to have a project that the 1.5 pennies that's
Right.
over, that's not part of the incremental HMT, we'll have to put that in there.
Right.
So it become part of the local legislation.
Hey, Brett, do you all have anything in writing, Steve, from like First Horizon or any of the entities saying like, for this to go forward or for us to consider this, we would need this
Yes,
type of
that's
incentive
what we had to
package?
show to Fulton County. So when I was talking about what the package we presented earlier, it's 3 letters, one from Kraft, one from First Horizon, one from our capital markets team that say, here's the metrics you have to hit before we go forward. And that was the 1.2 debt service coverage ratio and the 12% cash on cash return. So the answer is yes, and I'll forward you the package that was submitted in publicly that has a lot of that like financial detail. So yes,
And just a follow-up, it was for 15 years.
what was 15 years?
With the banks, it is, so they really want this incentive, I'm sure, because
Through the-
it's guaranteed money. And did they come up with the terms of 15 years?
They came up with a longer term, which we said we do not think we can get them to do anything more than 15 years. So we pushed back and they said, well, that would be the end of whatever the refi period, the outside date of a refi period anyway. That part is not in writing. If that was important, could we call them and say, will you add that year portion to what you wanted? Then we could certainly get that done. But the only thing they really articulate on is debt service coverage ratio, which is over the life of the project anyway. Every year you have to relook at your discount, your debt service coverage ratio and your cash on cash return. So it's like your stabilized cash on cash return during the life of the promissory.
And I assume this will happen, but if the capital stack changed, so you guys decide not to go forward with a loan and it was all equity financing, that this would be dissolved.
That
and
sounds great.
Yeah.
Yes. If we can get 200 million from this room to build one of the
Yeah.
hotels, it would be great. But yeah, certainly. We could add that in if there's no debt financing that this would terminate.
Gotta dream big.
Yeah.
So do we have kind of a timeline as to what we need to be considering and by when? I know there's a city council meeting.
Well, this is on the council's agenda for the September meeting.
What's the date of that meeting?
Is it the 6th?
Six.
Okay.
Or the-
But whatever that Thursday is.
Oh, it's the-
Okay. But, and I'm sure the developer would like to have it sooner rather than later, but there's not a mandated time that, either you accepted this date or it's going away. So really the CBB board needs to be, board members need to feel comfortable with this. And then the council is going to have to feel comfortable with this to adopt it. But, that's why we're meeting today. Hopefully I've answered some of your questions and Brent's answered some of your questions. Steve answered some of the other ones. But, I was talking to Brooke during the break and she said, maybe we go through each section when the board is ready, if you want to do it today, whatever, to say, what does this mean? What does this mean? And again, I'm happy to give you my interpretation of each section of the document, if you want to do that.
So I can articulate our ask. So
Yes.
our ask. The first thing we want to make sure of is that you and the city are on the exact same page, which we can't apparently do at one big meeting to make sure, both the IGA and this is done. And so it's the chicken and the egg. So we've tried to talk to certain members of the city council to explain, this kind of what the structure is and what we want to tee them up. But we're here to sort of answer your questions and make sure you're on board with these documents, because we want to take these same documents and say, hey, city, do you have questions about this, right? And conversations so that they're ready for the September vote. We'd really like to take this to market in September. And this is we cannot go to market without having this included in our package, because it's just such a big number. And so the linchpin for us to do our fundraising and to try to get deadlock up before interest rates change again is all depending on timing. Hoping to have it all approved at the September meeting, which means you would have to vote sometime before that or right after or during it. If I had a magic wand, we'd vote today, but I don't think that's, I don't want to put that pressure on anyone, but the early September meeting of the city is when we like to have it approved.
That's just for the agreement part, right? And then there's a whole thing of negotiation and discussion of what the terms are.
So I want the city to be fully aware of what you're going to enter into, right? So I basically want you to say, yes, this is the developer agreement we're okay with. So the city can say, okay, we're forcing them to sign a developer agreement. I can now attach it to the appendix and I know what is, they have the whole picture of what's happening with the fund. Because if we go to the city and leave it open-ended, which I think we tried to do last time, just not thinking through it fully, they said, well, you haven't even talked to the CVB yet, really. So get on board with the CVB, make that all line up and then come back to us. So what I would like is for the two to marry, and whatever they see is what you've already seen and what you see is what they, looked at.
I think that's very important to the city council as well. We're looking at this as a recommendation from the CVB, whatever the CVB finally, whatever their output is.
And Brent, you met with several of the city council folks. Have you?
I'm gonna punt that to Steve, so I'm not allowed to meet
Steve.
anyone because I'm terrible at speaking one-on-one. Just kidding. No. But I haven't met with him personally. I think
Okay.
Steve's done most of the talking.
Yeah. What kind of flavor were you getting from the city council? Are there a lot of different things they thought of, or do they kind of mirror our?
I certainly can't speak for the city council, but if you look statewide, and as I think our mayor said, this is going to mean a lot to the city in a lot of ways, taxes. This is, I believe, they see it as important. We need development to understand something's happened, and other than Cerebee, nobody has put major money in the ground. And this needs to happen. Our response at Fulton County, who does, and this happens, this isn't something that's a one or two off. Governments around the state have used this. This is a tool, as Rick said, for economic development. Are we interested in economic development? And I think the city is, and I suspect we will have their support. I mean, our presentation at Fulton County was very short with a lot of thanks for having the guts to do this in South Fulton.
So the city has a little different viewpoint too, right? They're looking at the property taxes that are coming in, whatever their portion of maybe the sales and use taxes are, all the other things that are raised up because of this. So that's kind of their viewpoint, which is it's theoretically a win from a tax perspective. So hopefully that's
and we'll keep trying to do it, but this could be 5 years later. I mean, this isn't going to happen if we don't get funded. Now, we're not going to go away. We're going to keep trying to do it, but I've been trying to do the Selborne Hotel for a long time.
The issue is not with residential, right? Residential is kind of a proven thing at this point. It's getting actual commercial financing down here you just can't point to something next door, which maybe this is the start. So now they can say, hey, look, the funding worked there, we can build here. And so hopefully it's a snowball. And when you were talking about, maybe you were talking about it, what do we have to do in the future? The future is really up to you. Once a use case has been proven and financing can happen for the hotel motel tax, You may want to continue to incentivize, you may not. It's kind of your choice, right? In the future, nothing locks you in, but it does give you a tool to help if you want to help in the future.
Can any future developer take action against us as a board if we say no to them because we said yes? Or if we decide to say yes, like what happens there? from a legal
No,
perspective?
because each project will be unique. So it's not like you know, treated one better than the other. It's not because no two pieces of real estate are the same. No two hotel developments are the same. So no.
So Rick, I'm sure you've gone over the document with a different frame of mind than we can. Was there anything in the development agreement that you would call our attention to?
No, from a legal perspective, both documents are fine.
I did ask if we could have it written to where we could read it.
Well, good luck with that.
First grade.
Yes.
I would say that I had
I
a
was a
head full of
person.
hair when I started reading this, but everybody who's seen it before would know that was a lie.
Yeah, to echo what Steve said too, my wife and I took a major leap of faith when we built Cherry Hollow Farm. We were really one of the only businesses outside of Serenbe. And we wouldn't have built it without, Serenbe being here. While it was confusing with everything we were going through the last, month and a half, we're a proponent of having lodging in this community. We have to send all of our clientele. We have 40, 50 weddings a year. We have to send everybody outside the confines of this town we love so much, right? We were hopeful that Weston would pop down at the Fox Hall, but that I can't remember when we attended that meeting, 10 years ago with Harrison. And that, that's still hanging out there. So we desperately need lodging for these businesses that will pop up. I would think that would be beneficial, not only within Serenbe and the confines of Metro Atlanta, but it would definitely help a lot of us in the long run things happen. So, and I just like to make another comment. Working with these folks here has been so impressive, the dedication that they have thrown at this. I mean, they have worked hours and read through things, and it's just really a good team. I'm really impressed that the folks that are on this group, they've got a lot of integrity and they got a lot of dedication to this, so, and to the group. So as much of the issues we brought forward and questioning, know their heart's in the right place.
I don't think there's any disagreement that we all want hotels here. That is yesterday, right?
Okay, it just feels, it feels like probably the most critical missing piece of information is probably that packet you referred to.
The Fulton County
Yeah,
Development
to just understand the need and like the verification of need and like having an understanding of that just seems like a baseline piece.
Okay.
Great.
Brent, how soon could you get that?
I could pull it up right now.
Yeah, but I can look on my computer and grab it, honestly.
How thick is it? How many pages?
Well, but it's only like 4 pages, and it talks about the sources of the cash, what it's being used for. It talked about all of the tax revenue and jobs that are generated because of this. It's basically the economic case for it. Oh, and then you're saying, hey, the letters from the banks and all that sort of stuff. That's all there too. That was part of what we submitted to Fulton County Development Authority. I think what they published might not have included that, but I can send that in the same email. It doesn't matter. So end of day is the answer.
I think that would be good.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
See.
Well, then at least we've done our due diligence on all the components we could have looked at. Right?
Yeah.
Before we make a recommendation. Are we voting or making a recommendation? When we get ready to do that?
You will vote to either accept the development agreement and the IGA or not. So you will have to vote.
Well, I think we need to read the document first in order to understand all. of
No,
that.
I get that, but I'm saying when this
When
comes
this
up for a final
happens.
decision, you will have to.
Yeah, I'm not.
Oh,
I mean, you're able to
Okay.
defer right now if you want.
Yeah, you don't have to vote today,
Or
but
But
at
he
some
wants us to
point,
vote before 6.
Yeah.
look, right, I mean, that's the
So we need-
request coming from the mayor, like, look, tell us whether you support this or not.
Yeah.
And that goes to the
Got it.
council, either recommendation of, hey, we think you guys should accept it or not.
does it have to be an in-person vote? Can we send a document out and everybody submit their vote
No,
Do we need
it's
to
gotta,
meet
you're gonna either have to do it
and have a
Zoom.
quorum?
Mhm.
That's fine.
We could do
Just
a
a question.
Zoom.
Yeah, you can do a virtual meeting.
Yeah, it has to be, you can't do it via email
Oh,
and all that,
fine.
so you either come together as a body or maybe do a blend, some are here and some are on Zoom or something. It has to be advertised.
Okay.
So you have to give Dana plenty of notice, but the law requires no less than 24 hours in advance of the meeting. It has to be advertised. And Dana can take care of that for you guys. Has to be an open meeting.
We could suggest a date now and give it to Dana and vote on a date.
Certainly.
Because we can't postpone, we can't not have this ready by the 6th, I don't think. We
No,
spend so much time.
we need to get it in.
It's not gonna get any easier,
No,
whether that vote is done in August, September, or in 2024. And I'm not trying to give Steve a heart attack, but you just need to, either you accept it or you
or
don't.
you don't, yeah. I agree.
And I'll offer the same thing that I offer to the council members. If you have questions and you want to talk to me, send me an email. I think everybody now has my email address because it's been going around, I think, with some of them. But Mike, if you will, send everybody my email. And believe it or not, I do have other clients in the city. So I may not be able to answer you that second, but I will get you an answer or get you on the phone as soon as I can. Okay.
Yeah, and depending upon, obviously, I heard my signature needs to be on the documentation. As well as I believe the secretary, is that what we understand? If
What's that?
remember we asked about the signatures? I'm sorry, the signatures for the agreement. The IGA, there needs to be a signed agreement, does there not?
Yeah, Steve.
Who signs that?
You're the chairman, but it'd be my recommendation to you that you have the vice chairman.
I
sign
agree.
this. Right, so Mike, it'd be you, and then who's the secretary?
Clarice.
And I don't know, Brent, is it written where it can be signed electronically, or does it have to be wet signature?
No, it's probably silent. I always try to do things electronic, so I don't have to go collect the signature.
Right. We certainly could add a provision of this that electronic signature would be sufficient. There's a federal law dealing with that, but we could add a provision so that if you're out of town, if that's part of the concern, that you could execute it remotely.
Well, I think we want to make sure that we're
Yeah.
covered. In every way, shape or form. If our signatures are going to be on the agreement, I want to be covered. I know Clarice wants to be covered. In case something crazy should happen, hurricane or something.
Is there ability for the rest of us to sign on the same document that we all endorse? It's not just left.
No,
with the
no,
vice chair and the secretary?
but you'll be in the, there'll be minutes taken of the vote.
How you vote.
Yeah, but again, I don't see this being a situation where an individual would be sued. I mean, if somebody wanted to challenge it, say that it's somehow or other in violation of the Constitution or the statutes of Georgia, that it would be a suit against the city probably, but let's say it's the city and the CVB as bodies, not as individuals. But again, let's get from Robbie that confirmation that you're covered, you're protected by the insurance policy. And aren't you glad you volunteered? So,
When's our paycheck coming?
yeah, it'll be in the mail.
Don't start with that.
So let me just ask, so what we're waiting on for Brent, what we want is confirmation that the potential lenders, how did you phrase it, Clarice?
It's just like the need
The need.
documents.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
send
and
you
the
the three,
difference that-
I'm gonna send you the 3 letters that we received from each of the banks. It's the same thing Fulton County Development Authority asked for, so.
I mean, is it something we could look at now so
So-
we could go ahead and
So what I would, if you were going to vote, you could just say, take a vote and maybe make it subject to receiving that and it being consistent with what I've said. Is that a possibility? I mean, I can,
No,
I would recommend that.
okay, I mean, I can find it and circulate it right now, if you want to see it.
Well, I'm just concerned about trying to gather again with everybody's travel.
I think we can do a quick Zoom. This is
Okay.
not a discussion at that
This
point.
is
I
like
think
a
it's like a
10-minute
call.
If you have it, we could send it to everybody's email.
I'm with
I mean, I have it in the PowerPoint.
I just know sometimes
But we all can't read it.
struggle to get everybody together.
Right.
I think this is the conversation, this is the meeting we needed to be all together face to face for
Yeah.
sure. But I think this next
The
piece.
next one
after
will
we
be
read it, I
easy.
think it's
Yeah, I
a
think the appropriate step is get the document, we can read it, and then if we have a couple more follow-up questions, probably goes back to this crew, not the lawyer. This is more business term questions, and then we can make a vote.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed.
I would suggest too, if you can, since we have Robbie here and I don't know what else is going on, particularly at planning commission meetings and council meetings and whatever, that you try and set the next meeting
Schedule
date.
today.
You know, whether some people should be here live because we need to have it open to the public, but then the rest of you can be on Zoom, whoever needs to be on Zoom. But I would suggest anyway, that you go ahead and pick a date and set that meeting for the vote.
Could we not do it on the 6th, 24th for the meeting?
no, do it before the 6th.
Let's do it the week before. Can we do it that week before? Is that okay? It's the week of the 28th.
Robbie, do we have any meetings? the
There are
week
no
of the 28th?
meetings of any commission or council. The next one is gonna be the council meeting.
So there's no
So you're clear.
historic commission or planning.
They met for the month.
I mean,
Yeah,
parks.
Historic planning and Parks and Commission have already met for August, so they're done.
So you could do it either next week or the week after, right? So the
What about
20.
the 24th? Anybody got?
I can do the 24th.
I can.
Hold on. I'm trying to find my schedule here.
Depends on what time.
Yeah.
4:30 in the morning.
Traveling.
That's about right. That's about right.
That's the only time.
Right, the elephant.
I love it.
4:30 AM. 4:30 AM.
Well,
Hear him out.
Kara, what would work on that day?
4:30 AM is great.
Perfect. I'll Zoom.
Just something after like noon, maybe after noon.
I can't do it. I can't do 12. I can't do any time after 12 and I could do early morning.
You could do it early morning.
Early morning on the 24th.
No,
Like, and we
but
can
not-
zoom in. right?
Can we
Right.
like
Eight-
look at
8 AM.
8 a.m.
So City Hall needs to be open. What time City Hall open?
the 28th?
Officially at 8:30, but I mean.
So it really shouldn't be before 8:30.
8:30 to 9.
Because you need to have
Yeah.
staff here. I mean, to open City Hall.
It could be hybrid though, like I said
I
earlier.
was gonna say, do we need to come in here to vote or
Some-
can we?
some-
Someone.
Somebody
We
needs
have
to be here
the
live.
meeting- There has to be the meeting generated here.
Right.
But everybody doesn't be here.
Oh,
Correct.
Everybody
Okay,
will be on
sorry,
Zoom.
sorry, got it.
Whoever can make it down here, we can. Make it down here.
It's always in the morning of the 24th.
What time?
Thursday?
8:30?
Okay.
8:30?
Can we do the
Better.
28th or the 30th?
28th would be better.
Brent, does that work
I'm
for
out
you?
of town.
Huh?
I'm out of town. Does that work for you? I could be on Zoom.
Oh, I'll cancel whatever.
I could do the,
I think I'm in town until September.
If you do the proxy to somebody.
I was wrong. It actually does say you need it for 15 years in one of the letters. So it's another good guy, but that was in one of the letters.
But you don't have to sign it.
So we on the 24th or what are we on?
We're voting, but you don't have to sign the document. You have to sign the document for the.
Or the
6.
meeting?
Correct. If you vote to approve,
Sign.
let's just say you vote to approve, it can be signed anytime after that.
That's
It doesn't have to be signed that minute.
All right, so what are we saying?
August. Can we do 24? please?
Yeah,
Before?
at 8:30 AM, no later than 9, done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like it.
I
I like
will be
it.
on
30?
Zoom, so I
So
will-
Mike, I was just gonna say that the right motion to make right now is to ask for a motion to continue this item to the meeting on whichever date and time you just selected and get a second and a vote on continuing it to then. And that handles this thing in the right way for the meeting.
Okay, so a motion to continue the topic of conversation around HMT. on the 24th at 8:30 in City Hall.
Next second.
Second. Motion passed.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Anybody opposed?
I made it, Clarice second.
I second him. Yeah, Mike made it.
Yep.
And so how many members have to attend in person?
I'd have to look at your enabling legislation, but should in person, oh, it doesn't matter. Have one or two. You can have everybody on Zoom mostly. That's not a problem.
Considered in person.
Right, but to have actual people participating in the meeting, either Zoom or here, would have to be a forum.
Oh, no, okay.
More than half of the body.
You can have everybody but one person if you wanted to on Zoom.
Okay, that was my, so at
Because
least
we,
one.
yeah, back during the pandemic, we were doing, I think, almost all of them completely Zoom.
Okay.
So do you need a commitment as to who that one person is?
Excuse me, Steve?
Yeah, I will commit to be that one person completely.
Okay.
Well,
Nice.
I'll be
I
here.
can be, I'll be here.
Okay, great.
You won't make me do
Let
it.
me ask you this, do you want me here that day for the vote? Say, no, I don't want you here.
No, I just don't know if it's needed.
I'm going to rephrase that. Am I needed here for the vote? If I am, I'll be here. If not, I'm not.
Be accessible if you need.
Yes. You know what? I'll be on Zoom. How about that?
That's right.
helpful. Yeah, we might have last minute questions.
I'm sending all the 3 letters to that email chain that was circulating earlier today on the CB feed Thursday, just so everyone has it. So if you don't get it, you can yell at me.
Robbie, you gonna send out a meeting invite for everybody? Okay.
We all good? Any other questions?
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
So moved. Done. Adjourned.
Well, you need to say
No,
everybody.
you need a second and a vote.
Yes.
I haven't been trained on this yet, sorry.
You need Don Hayes here to say no, I'm good.
We do,
Yeah.
that's another topic of conversation. We need board training for all of us on this, for sure.
I think Janice second.
Janice seconded.
I move.
I thought.
I second.
Brooke,
I don't
Brooke
know.
moved. Janice second.
That's fine.
I thirded.
One handy thing that you
We've all
guys
been
can do.
playing lawyer way too long.
I'll put a gavel in my hand.
Okay, thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.